Welcome back to Coffee with Kish. So today we're going to geek out about Mormonism through film. So there are Mormons out there in the arts and entertainment world, but there also is a vibrant film scene in Mormonism. A lot of it is admittedly kind of kitschy, the kind of stuff that Mormons make for Mormons to make fun of themselves in lighthearted ways. But then there's more serious attempts at cinema, like the works of Richard Dutcher, and here I'm specifically thinking of films like God's Army and Brigham City, both of which I've seen and enjoyed very much. And then there are historical films. Now, Mormons have been making film for a long time. In fact, my great-grandfather invested in a Book of Mormon film. The family claim is that he did so to the tune of $500. And the movie was a flop. I think it was called something like Corianton. And, did my great-grandfather actually invest in this film? Did he invest so much money in this film? It's true that the film existed, that the film was a flop, but I just take some small pride in that, at least family lore about a connection to Mormon film. Because I love film. I'm not a big film buff, but I watch a fair amount of movies, and some of them you might actually call tasteful and sophisticated cinema, real films. But then, like everybody else out there, I enjoy a lot of goofy flicks, popcorn fodder, if you will. So, historical Mormon film. Well, the LDS Church itself, for educational purposes, has depicted a lot of events of the Restoration in film. And it's kind of surprising to me that the latest big film efforts in the Mormon community are not funded and produced by the church, but rather produced by faithful Latter-day Saints and organizations who are defending and promoting the LDS Church and its faith claims. Here I'm thinking specifically of the 2021 film Witnesses, directed by Mark Goodman, starring Paul Wuthridge as Joseph Smith. Now, this is really not only an interesting film, its origins, I would say, are interesting because the primary driver behind this film is an apologetic and scholarly organization, which emphasis you put there on scholarly or apologetic will be, kind of reflect your perspective on all of this. But the Interpreter Foundation is a kind of successor to the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, which was spearheaded early on in the 1980s, I think, by Jack Welch, a professor of law at Brigham Young University, whom I actually once worked for as a teaching assistant when he and my Roman history professor, John Hall, who is recently deceased, sadly, taught a history of the New Testament course, or history of the Gospels course. So it was a mixture of Roman history and, history of Jesus together. And of course, those two are intersect fully in first century Palestine. So these two guys, John Hall, the Roman historian, Jack Welch, who was a trained classicist in his own right, but also an expert in Jewish law and just ancient law in general. They got together and taught this course, and I was the teaching assistant. And I think really Jack Welch, Professor Welch of the law school, used my services much more than my own professor, John Hall, did. In fact, I would get calls at 8 in the morning from Jack Welch telling me he wanted to meet with me, et cetera, et cetera. And the stories that I've heard about Jack, and I really, really like him. He's a great guy, energetic, enthusiastic, optimistic, friendly. I can't say enough good things about Jack Welch. Well, he kind of has a reputation for keeping odd hours and contacting people in odd hours. Maybe that's not reflective of other people's experience, but from what I've heard, I went to church with one of his college roommates who told me that he would do things like practice his band instrument at late hours of the evening, which disturbed my former ward friend. Anyway, so Jack Welch founded Farms, and sometime in the 1990s, no, it was early 2000s, I guess. I hope I'm not mingling the history there. Farms got pulled into BYU at the invitation or insistence of President Gordon B. Hinckley, the late LDS prophet, 2 prophets ago now. Now we're on Nelson now. Before Nelson, there was Monson, and before Monson there was Hinckley. And I have a lot of good memories of President Hinckley, but he was responsible for sort of strong-arming the Farms organization, which was, even though it was largely staffed by or a lot of the contributors were BYU professors, he moved them onto campus where they became the Neal Maxwell Institute. And from there, the Neal Maxwell Institute kind of changed over time and became a different kind of organization. It wasn't focused on the more apologetic Hugh Nibley style of defending Mormonism through antiquity work that Farms had been doing, and became now more of a religious studies organization, at least for a while. It continues to morph, and I don't want to get anything wrong here, but in that transformation, a couple of its key sort of leading lights or key members left the Neal Maxwell Institute, and I know that, from the story that I've heard, one of their former students, a gentleman by the name of David Bakavoy, whom I really love a lot. He's a wonderful guy who, by the way, was a student in that class taught by Jack Welch and John Hall. That's where I first met him. David Bakavoy, who was an institute teacher, and who has, I don't know what his standing with the church is now. I know he's gone through some changes recently, but you can go look him up and look at his podcast appearances. David's a wonderful scholar. He got a PhD in biblical studies at Brandeis. And another interesting coincidence is that I taught a semester at Brandeis in a different department from the one that he studied in, but I taught for a semester at Brandeis some years after he graduated from Brandeis. But David was friends with these exiles from the Maxwell Institute, and they got together at an Olive Garden, I think it was. This is the story. This is the story as I've heard it. Take it with a grain of salt. And he had an idea. David had an idea for a new group that would replace Farms, that would have the sort of independence that Farms once had. And this was the Interpreter. It became Interpreter. And Interpreter really kind of took off, and it's going gangbusters and producing a lot of scholarly and apologetic material. You can buy their stuff. I know it's available on Amazon and elsewhere, so if you're really into the intersection of Mormonism and ancient studies, and in a sort of apologetic vein, you'll really love the stuff that Interpreter Foundation does. Farms, the L.A. Maxwell Institute, Interpreter, and the shocking thing is that Interpreter gets together the money and organizes the effort to produce an historical film. And this is about the witnesses to the Book of Mormon. Now, if you open up a Book of Mormon today, one of the first things you'll encounter is a testimony of 3 witnesses who were, saw an angel that showed them the plates, and these men lent their name to this published witness that goes in the front of every Book of Mormon, where they testify to the world that, they saw these things, they had these experiences, and, they're an affirmation of the divine truth of that book. So it's a big deal in that regard, and I think this is a really human story. If we take all of the, religious claims, faith assertions, doubts, and put all of that aside, here we have 3 men that lent their name and their fortunes to this project that was bound to be controversial. And boy, did it turn out to be extremely controversial. And so they kind of paid that price. I mean, they did get the benefit of being founding members of the new church that an LDS person would describe as God founding through the prophet Joseph Smith. And yet, those early years of Mormon history were years of suffering and doubt and upset and persecution by the haters, as we might say it today. This movie gets into all of that, the ups and downs of being one of these witnesses. Now, of course, it's an interpretation of the past, and it's an interpretation of the past that's produced by believers in this work. The believers in Joseph Smith, believers in his divine calling, in the Book of Mormon. And so, is there a slant to it? Yeah, there's a slant to it. But, there's always going to be a slant. And I think it's just a lot of fun to see in, a pretty well-produced package, a recreation of this history, or an interpretation of that story and that history. Is it a little bit much at times? Well, yeah, because I would say there are points where it veers into the kind of sentimentality and hagiographical, there's that shining light, like the nimbus on an angel or saint, that on occasion that really makes it out to be more than what some would be comfortable with. But I would agree with Richard Bushman in saying that there's really something to the historical testimony of those who believe in something. And to just take out the perception of the miraculous that these people had around Joseph Smith, well, that would also not do justice to the past. So I think there's room for this kind of optimistic, positive, and faithful representation and interpretation of the past, while at the same time being very encouraging of critical takes of the past, doubting takes on the past, sort of secular viewpoints on these things. But I don't think that we can insist that a telling of a faith story like this, which was by its very nature and as a function of its place in a larger Christian tradition, full of miracles. So I probably give this a little bit more leeway and sympathy than maybe other ex-LDS people or people who don't affiliate with the LDS Church would. Um, the other thing that I would say on, slightly negative note is that I think the guy who plays Joseph Smith doesn't look like Joseph Smith at all. That's not a big deal, especially these days, right? Where, people of all different genders and ethnicities are stepping into new roles. The fact that I would sit here and complain that Paul, this actor, is just too handsome to be Joseph Smith. There's a difference between ruggedly handsome and I think sort of like model on the runway handsome. And I think Paul, bless his heart, whoever he is, I don't know anything about him, but he's been in a fair number of movies, a number of these LDS oriented productions. Yeah, he's just a little bit too handsome for Joseph. But okay, whatever. We'll leave that aside. Now, another thing that's interesting about this, though, is if the church had produced it, if this were the kind of thing that were done to show in a Sunday school class all the way through, there's some of the, gritty or uncomfortable elements that might have been left out. And one of the ones that is very noticeable for me as a person who's been involved in criticism of Mormonism, scholarship on Mormonism, the back and forth between apologists and critics and historians of different flavors, Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger. Okay, so that's a very uncomfortable thing, and not the kind of thing that one would find in a church-made movie that was designed to be shown in a seminary class for kids or in a Sunday school setting. You're not going to have it there. Is it historical? Well, yes. Joseph Smith had some kind of extramarital relationship. Well, there's a big question around that, extramarital, but a relationship with a woman who was not his first wife, Emma, with a young woman by the name of Fanny Alger. And even though this film doesn't really dig into that deep, it doesn't hide it. It doesn't paper it over. And I would say it is very important for the overall narrative and the thread of the story that involves Oliver Cowdery, because this was something that really infuriated Oliver Cowdery and sort of drove him out of the prophet's circle. He left the church, and then in this movie it depicts accurately that later in life Oliver Cowdery rejoins the saints out west, and so that's kind of cool. Anyway, I recommend this film. I first saw it in Utah in the theater. You're not, if you're watching this outside of the sort of Mormon Mountain West area, you may not have the opportunity to see it because I'm in the southeastern United States. It certainly didn't come to my area, and I regret that. I wish there were a way that more people who are interested in this kind of thing around the country could see these films. They're not the best cinema out there, but I think they're very entertaining and engaging. If you're a critic of the LDS Church or you're a skeptic, yes, you're going to find some of this a little bit not to your taste, perhaps. Even if you are a member of the church, there may be some people out there who are not into this. And I'll give you one small example. So when I saw it in Utah, I was just dying to see it. I was really eager to see this movie. But I was having a hard time getting anybody else around me interested in seeing this movie. And I found that, frankly, kind of shocking. But finally I kind of twisted my father-in-law's arm, and he went with me to see the movie, and we're sitting there watching this film, and my father-in-law, and I thought this was really kind of I don't want to embarrass him too much. He's a great man, but he's getting on in years a little bit, and he's not a big movie goer. So I looked over, and at one point he'd kind of fallen asleep there watching the film. I couldn't imagine falling asleep watching the film. It's pretty darn engaging, but so be it. And then afterwards, we got to talking about it. And I think the reason why he reacted why he did is not because the film was boring, but because just for him personally, it's difficult to watch something that's so dear to his heart be interpreted in a particular way that might force a view that doesn't accord with his own on him. So he doesn't like the intrusion of dramatic recreations and interpretations of the faith story of his religion. And that's totally cool. I completely understand that. So now I feel a little bit guilty for twisting his arm. He was doing it to be nice to me. I certainly enjoyed the entire movie. I got this copy from a friend on discussmormonism.com who sent me, because I guess he got it, and he didn't want to keep it, and so he was looking to get rid of it, and he kindly sent me his copy. So now I have a Blu-ray copy of Witnesses. Now, the other reason I'm bringing this up is because coming up this fall, I think in October, a new movie in this series is going to be released, which is 6 Days in August, that covers the succession in the leadership of the church after Joseph Smith was assassinated. So this is the story of how the Quorum of the 12 Apostles become the stewards of the church after Joseph Smith's assassination at the urging of Brigham Young, who becomes the second president of the church, and against the competition of Sidney Rigdon, who was extremely vital to Joseph Smith's early translation efforts, including his new translation of the Bible. So, I mean, that 6 Days in August covers events that are very tense. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of drama in that. There are rumors emerging from this, people criticizing it already, but my feeling about all of this is, bring it on. Give me these movies, let me watch them, make up my own mind, and enjoy them. Even if the interpretation of history is one that I don't necessarily share, I just think it's interesting to see what people do in the dramatic recreation of these historical events. So anyway, thank you for joining me on Coffee with Kish, and I hope to see you next time. Please subscribe and like the video. That would help me very much. Take care.